shift happened because the US was pretty much the only standing superpower after World War II. But this system wasn't about one thing. It wasn't about commodities. It was about cementing the dollar's role as the world reserve currency. Because being the one money to rule them all gave that country access to two specific superpowers. And one of them was economic stability. Stability allows for things like international trade to happen. If you want countries to trade, you need a common value and a common money that everyone agrees to. And the second superpower is the country whose currency becomes the one benefits from rising asset prices, including treasury bonds, which is seen as safe. So countries park their wealth into money that is seen as stable to preserve their wealth against inflation and all the other currencies. That's why countries like Japan, China, and the UK are some of the biggest holders of US assets through foreign exchange reserves, roughly $7 to $8 trillion worth. But then in secret, another superpower was made for the US dollar, and that was the ability to control the world's energy.
The standard of living of all Americans can be traced back to here, the vast oil-rich deserts of Saudi Arabia.
Our house is your house.
There's an Arab saying, the sands are blowing. And I submit to you, King Fahd, that if the sands of time give us any hint of the future, it is that in the days ahead, the friendship between the Saudi Arabian and American people will be a strong and vital force in the world.
Now, after the dollar got off the gold standard, it became the super petrodollar, and it replaced gold by what some people like to call black gold, aka oil. Now, how this happened is one of the most interesting stories that has ever happened throughout history.
The petrodollar is actually a device invented by Kissinger and Nixon.
U.S. President Richard Nixon sent his Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger to Saudi Arabia for a secret meeting.
That meeting took place on a battleship called the USS Quincy, and very few records were kept of that meeting. But Roosevelt promised the King of Saudi Arabia weapons and protection in exchange for the United States to have the exclusive right to develop oil from Saudi Arabia using dollars. Meaning, if countries wanted to trade the most important commodity of all, oil, they needed to get their hands on dollars. And from that point on, oil would be priced in USD. And if a country tried to get their hands on oil without using dollars, that country historically needed more freedom in their lives. And it's this arrangement between the US and Saudi Arabia that helps the US with dominance over global trade and helping preserve the US dollar as the world's reserve currency for over 75 years now. But just this Sunday, the Prince of Saudi Arabia announced that he would not renew this contract. And this decision is part of a much bigger trend where countries are ditching dollars in international trade and oil transactions.
The dollar. Looks like they're dumping it.
The world's largest oil producer, Saudi Arabia, is reportedly asking to join BRICS.
As more and more developing nations, including some of the world's largest economies, decide to ditch the dollar in their bilateral trade, voices of concern and even despair are being heard in the US over the looming end of America's global financial dominance.
World, but arguably the biggest export that the United States has by far are US dollars. We aid a lot of countries with a lot of money. By design, we are the world's biggest money exports. So the question is, how does being able to export dollars help the US economy? And the answer is, it helps in every single way imaginable. Because having the petrodollar system has created a demand around the world for other countries to buy our dollars and our treasury bonds, because that's how the US fuels its growth, by issuing this debt, this debt, this debt, this debt, these treasury bonds that other people buy. It's also created a stable economy, lower interest rates, and liquidity in financial markets. And this has been hugely beneficial for the US stock market through higher stock prices and investment flows. Without the ability to export dollars, that would mean bad things. But what does it really mean? Believe it or not, we've seen what it means because it's happened to other countries.
Greece is on the verge of default tonight, hours from what many believe is a near certainty.
Scenes like this are playing out across the country.
The UN says food prices tripled last year and estimates 4 in 5 Syrians now live below the poverty line.
Since 2019, the Lebanese pound has lost more than 90% of its value.
Basic commodity prices have almost doubled.
Argentina's annual inflation reached more than 100% in February. This is the first time since 1991 it's been in triple digits.
So his costs go up whenever the value of the South Sudanese pound falls against the US dollar.
I've tried my best to warn people, things are going to be so bad. This financial crisis that we're headed for is worse than the one we had in 2008. It's going to make 2008 look like a Sunday school picnic. Take your money out of the bank. Don't leave it there. You're going to lose it one way or the other. They don't care about the country. They care about themselves. Stocks are so extremely overpriced right now. They have to collapse. Any day you go to sleep, you could wake up and it could be a whole new world. We screwed the world over in 1971. We defaulted on our commitment. We promised to pay gold, and then we told our creditors we're paying nothing. We basically just said these checks are no good. We made a commitment and we're defaulting on it. Now, the dollar went down a lot during the 1970s. It lost about 2/3 of its value relative to other fiat currencies like the Deutschmark or the Swiss franc.
People didn't de-dollarize then. When the U.S. broke the relationship to gold, why didn't a currency rise at that moment that was tied to gold?
There really weren't many currencies left that were still tied to gold because they were tied to the dollar, and then the dollar detethered, from gold. But what happened was the dollar lost a lot of value during the 70s, right? The Swiss franc went from 25 cents to 75 cents. The yen, it went from 360 yen to the dollar to maybe about 150. I think the Deutschmark, we used to get 4 marks to the dollar. Then it went down to like 1.5. The dollar got marked down. Oil went from $3 a barrel to $30 a barrel in the 70s. Gold went from 35 to 800, right? So the dollar lost a lot of value. And that meant every American got poorer in the 1970s. That's the main reason that so many women started working in the 1970s. During the 1960s, if you were a married woman, most of you didn't have a job. Your husband could support you. It didn't even matter what kind of job, blue-collar job. He supported his wife. But inflation was so high and people's money lost so much value that in order to pay the bills, the wife had to get a job. It wasn't like, women felt liberated and so they decided to work. They were liberated when they didn't have to work. They were forced to work because their husbands couldn't support them anymore because of the inflation. But the dollar did stabilize in the 80s, with the very high interest rates under Volcker. Rates went to 20%, and Reagan came in and, we kind of like saved the dollar, got a reprieve. But now I think the de-dollaration is going to be complete because the other thing that happened to support the dollar was the petrodollar. So what happened is we went off the gold standard. So there was no longer any gold. We made a deal with Saudi Arabia to price oil in dollars. Say, hey, we'll defend you. We'll defend your regime. We'll keep your enemies at bay. You just price your oil in our currency. So now all of a sudden we did create a use for the dollar because if you wanted oil, which everybody wanted, you needed dollars to pay for it. So that also really helped support the dollar. But the petrodollar now, unless you're blind, is on its way out. A lot of these countries are trying to figure out how to bilaterally deal oil in currencies other than the US dollar. When the world moves away from the dollar totally, then the collapse is going to continue. It started in 1970. It's going to continue. We're going to see a huge erosion of purchasing power, but it's going to be even worse. The economy today, the U.S. economy, is in much worse shape than it was in 1970. I mean, we were a creditor nation in 1970. Even in 1980, we were still a creditor nation. That meant the world owed us a lot more than we owe the world. Today, not only are we the biggest debtor nation, we owe more money than all the other debtor nations in the world combined. Back even in the mid-1980s, America still had trade surpluses. Our factories were productive enough that we exported more than we imported. Now we have the biggest trade deficits in the world, biggest trade deficit ever. So the economy is a shadow of what it was.
This is James 5:3. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. Shalom, Kahala Yahweh, Ba'Shem Yashai, Ba'Shem Ruach. Double honors my teachers, the apostles and elders of the great millstone. Peace and mercy to the elect, with the house of David reborn again in this generation. And shalom to the 130 Yasharallah, who today are known as the Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, who before losing our true heritage, we were known as, and still are, the true Hebrew Israelites of the Holy Bible. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about what Saudi Arabia did, right? The descendants of Ishmael to Babylon the Great. And as we've seen in the videos in the beginning of this lesson, where it gave a real quick overview of how the petrodollar was created, let's go and read this article, and we'll get back to this in a bit. This is Saudi Arabia's petrodollar exit, a global finance paradigm shift. It says, the financial world is bracing for a significant upheaval following Saudi Arabia's decision not to renew its 50-year petrodollar deal with the United States, which expired on Sunday, the 9th of June 2024. The lapsed security agreement signed by the United States and Saudi Arabia on 8th of June 1974 establishes two joint commissions. One, an economic cooperation. That's basically Saudis or ISMAEL only selling oil in US dollars. And the other on Saudi Arabia's military needs. Right? That's basically America, Babylon the Great, giving Saudi Arabia all of its weaponry needed to protect itself against its neighbors like Yemen and all these other countries like Iran that it used to be at war with, and was said to have heralded an era of increasingly close cooperation between the two countries. American officials at the time expressed optimism that the deal would motivate Saudi Arabia to ramp up its oil production. They also envisioned it as a blueprint for fostering economic collaboration between Washington and other Arab countries. The crucial decision to not renew the contract enabled Saudi Arabia to sell oil and other goods in multiple currencies, including Chinese RMB, euros, yen, and yuan, instead of exclusively US dollars. Additionally, the potential use of digital currencies like Bitcoin may also be considered. The latest development signifies a major shift away from the petrodollar system, established in 1972, when the US decoupled its currency from gold, and is anticipated to hasten the global shift away from the US dollar. That right there is the key to this, Akim. So you see, as the videos showed, right, Esau, back before the Lord started to take him down, after that, that's when the Lord started to come down on these Edomites and start to collapse their empire. Well, back then, you had these devils go out and make a deal with Ishmael, right? And because of this, the dollar still had value, and it was a requirement if you wanted to buy oil. Well, we seen what's happened with Nigeria a couple of months ago, where Nigeria started to buy their gold or their oil in gold, and Saudi Arabia wasn't going to turn that down, so of course they took it. Right, that was a big FU to the U.S. Treaty. Right, and now, as you heard, right, they're going to start to sell oil in other currencies, in their own currencies, or they're either going to go with the Chinese RMB, or they're going to go with the United BRICS currency. Because again, when you kind of read on this article, this is from bizcommunity.com, it goes into how Saudi Arabia basically is going to join with all these central banks, right, including the guy on top, right, these guys, and all the other central banks that were set up around the world, right, even over in Iran, right, and everybody's in on this, right, all the world leaders, right, they're all in on the new CBDC, and ultimately it's going to be coming in through companies like this, right, Enbridge. But I don't want to digress away from what's happened, right? Saudi Arabia, these Ishmaelites, have now basically stopped America from being able to require other nations to hold US dollar, and hence hold the debt that the dollars create, right? And that means that the scheme that these Edomites had here in America and its centralized private corporation is coming to an end. But the thing is these devils knew, right? In fact, they're the ones who are actually facilitating the destruction of the US dollar, right? Because when you look at the world trade figures and everything, when you get into that first video we watched, you watch the whole thing, the guy explains how the world like international currency settlement is always done in US dollars, meaning it is a needed currency. And until they get the BRICS currency going, which ain't going to happen for about another couple of years, other countries aren't going to jump the US dollar that quickly. Large systems take a while to go through. But that being said, this right here basically now puts the screws to Babylon the Great. Things are going to start to get a lot worse here in America. We're going to see inflation get even worse. The dollar is going to lose more of its money value, and things are just going to get harder. And what is that going to cause? It's going to cause a cycle, right? A domino effect where now, because people are buying less, there's going to be less hours to work. So people are going to lose their jobs, and that's going to then cause more closures. And it's just going to get bad. It's going to be what the Bible talks about, right? And why is this? Because, well, this country, this nation, right, this temporary satanic nation known as Babylon the Great in the Bible, America, was set up using an illusion, right? A Babylonian money illusion. But ultimately it was used to enrich these Edomites on top and give them a stepping stone to world domination, which is where they believe they're going to end. What does the Bible say? The Bible says, this is Habakkuk 2:6. Shall not all these take up a parable against him and taunting proverb against him, and say, woe to him that increaseth that which is not his? How long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. Right? So that right there is talking ultimately against these Edomites. Right? They've built their whole system up on what the Bible refers to as usury, illusions, predatory lending. The whole system is a scam that indebts the people to the centralized, privately owned banks. Okay, and everybody knows this, right? Everybody who has, two brain cells and can look further than the mainstream media, headlines, can know that the banking system's rigged. But it's done so in a way where it benefits Babylon the Great, America. So that's a lot of people don't go against it. But what's happening now is you're seeing the system of thick clay. And when you get into this word thick clay, when you get into the Blue Letter Bible, right? This is the verse here. Go all the way down. With thick clay, go to the word.
Strong's H 5671. Avteet.
Right? And it says it's a weight of pledges, heavy debts. Right? So that's what America does. It's a system. It's not a system of money, right? It's a system of debt, right? That's what the dollar ultimately represents now. It's debt. So because of this, what do you think is going to happen to Saudi Arabia? Well, let's watch this.
The United States is angry, and the consequences are severe. On June 9th, Saudi Arabia rejected a security agreement with the United States and simultaneously signed an oil trade agreement with China, settling in yuan. This is a fatal blow to the dominance of the U.S. dollar. Subsequently, the Pentagon dispatched a large number of U.S. troops to American bases in Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, and Jordan. Most of the forces of the 82nd Airborne Division, the 13th Assault Division, and the Rapid Reaction Forces of the 1st Cavalry Division have completed their deployment in military bases in Jordan and Bahrain. Additionally, 2 National Guard units from the U.S. mainland have received orders to head to the Middle East. To avoid being ousted from the Middle East and to consolidate the position of the U.S. dollar, America has set its sights on Saudi Arabia. At the same time as the U.S. military action, Iran's Supreme Leader Khamenei announced unconditional support for Lebanon to counter Israel's war against them and will participate in it. This means Iran has officially declared war on Israel. Meanwhile, a Russian 13,000-ton nuclear submarine is conducting exercises 80 nautical miles off the coast of Florida, targeting the U.S. mainland. Putin has promised Iran that Russia will always support Iran in its war against Israel. All these events and conflicts converge on Saudi Arabia. No one could have anticipated that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, stepping onto the historical stage for the first time, would give the world such a massive shock.
This is Joel 22 and 20. But I will remove far off from you the northern army, and will drive him into the land barren and desolate, with his face towards the east sea, and his hinder part towards the utmost sea. And his stink shall come up, and his ill savor shall come up, because he hath done great things. So you see, just like I said, other people are also seeing it, right? Just like when Saddam Hussein wanted to get off of the US dollar, right? And then Iraq got invaded. Same thing with Libya, right? And same thing with these other countries that try to ditch the dollar. Well, in this case here, these Edomites want to actually ditch the dollar. So they're going to allow this to happen. Okay, and everybody's going to jump onto the BRICS system. That's going to be the new world order currency, more likely, right? Or at least it's going to be based off of the BRICS system. And it's going to be a basket of currencies. And what do I mean by that? I mean that it's going to be a centralized digital currency that, for example, like you're here in Los Angeles, right? You have, so much digital currencies. Well, when you go to Japan, it'll be the same currency that you could use, but it'll automatically transfer to their system, right? Instant currency exchange, and any fluctuation in prices will or in the currencies will adjust automatically. Basically, it'll be a one world currency, right? And you won't notice the changes, just like how you don't notice when you cash a Wells Fargo check at Bank of America, right? It just goes through. So that's how these devils are going to work this, right? They're going to make it convenient, and it's going to be all part of the system. And then what they're going to do, they're going to bring out a scenario where the old dollar system collapses, right? And now, right, with the dollar's last, strength that it had, right, being tied to the oil system, which, like I said, it's been about a year now that Saudi Arabia has already been vocalizing that they've been wanting to move away from dollar exclusivity, and they were going to sell their oil in different currencies, and the deal with Nigeria buying their oil in gold, because they found all that gold, that became like a prime example of Saudi Arabia no longer honoring the U.S. Petrodollar agreement. But all this is taking place for one thing to happen, and that is for prophecy to come through, right? With this move, regardless if it's Esau doing it, which more likely it is, right? Because again, all these countries are all, playing to Esau's fiddle, and they're all going along with it, even though they seem like they're the bad guys or the good guys, right? Yes, real people die, but the elites at the very top, the kings of Edom that sit and watch over all this stuff and that make the decisions, they have it all planned out. They got both sides of the wars, though the wars are true, or real, I should say. The people that sit on top, they control both sides, right? And that would be the kings of Edom. But all this is going to happen because the Lord's going to trick these Edomites into this grand mass war known as World War III. The Bible calls it Armageddon, where the Lord's going to take the Northern Army, which is the Army of America, to Saudi Arabia. And what's happening now, with Saudi Arabia has for the most part ditched the exclusivity deal with the US dollar, making the dollar worth anything really. These Edomites are going to have to make sure to go over to Saudi Arabia and take control. And besides that, they also got to go to Saudi Arabia because they're going to be heading to Israel soon. Because right now, the Lord is putting things into the world to cause all these nations to come together there in the land of Israel. And this is why. And this is Job 14:5. Seeing his days are determined, and the number of his months are with thee, thou hast appointed his bounds that he cannot pass. And that's ultimately talking about the wicked, these Edomites, right? The so-called Caucasian race. Their kingdom is only going to last for a certain amount of time, and that time is the time that the Lord has set up for these Edomites. Remember, every day we get come by is a day closer to these Edomites' empire collapsing and the nation of Israel being reestablished in the earth. Now, until then, with the events that took place with the Saudi Arabia basically no longer renewing the petrodollar deal with the US, we're going to start seeing the price of oil go up. Everything else is going to also increase in value because of or cost, I should say, because the dollar is going to start to lose a lot more value. And that right there eventually is going to lead to the prophecies that the Bible talked about, right? The destruction of the economy, the famines that would come and kill off a lot of people. So, I just want to go ahead and share this. I thought it was important for you all to learn. So hopefully this was edifying. So until next time, I want to give all honor, glory, and praises to Yahweh, B'Ashem Yahushai, B'Ashem Ruach HaKodesh. Shalom.